literally becoming comfortable with chaos is what a lot of people from the military bring to the civilian workforce. Doing nothing is always more destructive than doing something wrong. Meet this stranger here or develop this relationship there. I'm not worried about them stabbing me in the back because I know some small percentage of people are going to. And it's happened enough now that I'm just like, yeah, well, I'll just pull out the knife and keep on moving. I'm not going to post your job. And normally you can see the expressions that I get from people like, what? You post your job, Tim. You post it. I'm not going to go out and compete with you on the exact same platforms. I'm going to go out and find the people who aren't applying to the jobs and get the person you really need and want.
We are live on the Objective Hiring Show. Today we're joined by Scott. Scott, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely, Tim. Great to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Oh, it's our pleasure. And I'm really pumped to speak to you. We spoke earlier, a couple of weeks ago, and you're a very interesting character. So I'm looking to learn more about you today. And I think a great place to start would be just a brief introduction about yourself, because then our audience can start to think about who they're listening to today.
For sure. And you know, we're all interesting characters. I'll tell you that much. And that's one thing that I've carried with me my entire life. I was born a sales guy, you know, and so if there's any skill set that I've ever had, mine carried with me my entire life. Sure, I played sports and baseball and football and all this stuff, you know, and joined the Marine Corps. But at the end of the day, I've just always been somebody that makes friends with people. And so, you know, and I see that in my son too. He's the same way. Anywhere we go, just makes friends. And so if there's one thing I've recognized over time is that we're all very unique, you know, we're all very interesting folks if you take the time to get to know us. But who I am for your audience, you know, I'm from the U.S., born in the Midwest, born and raised in a lowly state called Ohio, you know, and it's a great place to live. It's too cold in the winter and a little too hot in the summer, you know, but it's cheap here. So I grew up and quite unexpectedly, I mean that literally, I had no idea I was going to do this until the day that this guy knocked on my door. Right out of high school, started college, didn't go super well right from the start. And this recruiter knocked on my door when I was a teenager. And I tried to close the door on him, Tim. I really did. Because I'm not one of those guys through high school where you're like, that guy is joining the military. You know what I mean? They're in all their junior ROTC programs and stuff like that. I was not that guy. I was a transitioning jock to punk rocker in high school. I was a punk rocker, you know, and I tried to shut the door on him. But he actually stopped me and he was just like, hey, I was wondering if you'd like to take a test. And I was alone at my house. My mom's at work, you know, and I was like, a test caught my attention. I'm like, well, sure, I'll take a test. I love tests. So I let him in. That's how I became a Marine, you know, so joined the Marine Corps, went off. And honestly, you know, again, just to give your audience some color, I really thought that I would just go to boot camp. I signed up to be a military police officer. I would go to boot camp, go to infantry school, go to military police officer school, and I'd be back home in time by September of that year to get back into college where I belong, you know? And so I was like, okay, we'll just, this little diversion, you know, get some college money. And so I went off and I was ready to go, went to ship out to boot camp on my birthday. That's a great place to be for your birthday, you know? And I was sitting down in the MEP station, the out processing station. And I still remember this day like it was yesterday, but the guy was sitting there. He had all these stripes up and down his arm. I'm just a kid, you know, and he's just like, so I see you're joining the military police. I'm just like, probably called him sir, you know, and you're not supposed to because he's enlisted, you know, and I'm just like, yes, sir. He's like, well, you see that kid out there? And he's like, well, he wants to be a military police officer. I'm like, well, that's good for him, you know? And he's like, well, the thing is you got the last slot for the state of Ohio. And I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, well, based on his test scores, all he can do is infantry or military police. And he was like, based on your test scores, you can do any job in the Marine Corps. He's like, so now he starts playing on my ego as a kid, you know, and he's like, so Scott, why he didn't call me Scott, I'm sure. But he's like, you'd be doing the Marine Corps a tremendous favor if you took this job instead, slid the paper across the desk, you know, and I look at it. And of course I'm feeling all proud, you know, and I'm like, I'd be doing the Marine Corps a favor, you know? And I'm like, okay, I'll take that job. I've never heard of it. Don't know what that is. I'll sign right there. And because I was a teenager, you're not reading the fine print or the contracts, you know? But I signed up to be a cryptologist. And that's what I ended up being in cryptology. And well, let's just say I didn't make it back by September to start college because crypto has like a 2.5, 3 year school, to be a cryptologist, and I didn't again. But I have no regrets. Everything worked out the way it was supposed to. Went to college later, years later. Still young, and honestly, after all that, college was super easy because you have that discipline now from all those years in the Marine Corps, and got my finance degree. Thought I was going to be a stockbroker. I think you and I talked about this. Yeah, and that's became a stockbroker. Hated it, and that's what kind of got me referred into the recruiting industry, which I remember chatting with you about. It was like I didn't even know that this was a profession before I got into this industry. I didn't know people did this for a living. I just, like I said, when I thought of recruiters, I just thought of the gunnery sergeant that showed up at my door when I was a teenager and convinced me to join the Marine Corps, So that opened the door. I got into IT staffing with a large company called Tech Systems. So I'm a techie, and they put me up on an Air Force base to go after the third-party defense integrators out of the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, which is a wonderful fit because that's an Air Force base. I'm a Marine. And so the Marines are the brunt of many jokes from the other forces. You know what I mean? The Air Force guys, we're the smart ones, and you're just a dumb Marine. You eat crayons, And I'm like, I do, here, sign this contract, So that worked out well. And so did that for like 3 years, and that until I got recruited into the Sara Lee organization, Fortune 500 food company, which I thought would be cool because I could see what life was like on the other side of the desk, since I've been selling these services into large companies for so long. And so joined Sara Lee back in 07. Been a long time. I'm getting old, Tim. And to take over their IT recruiting, like an office out of Cincinnati. But right from the start there, one of our first projects that I was supporting was the outsourcing of IT, both applications and infrastructure simultaneously, to two different vendors, by the way, HP and IBM, which was just a nightmare of a project because it was just a year of finger pointing. You know what I mean? HP is that's IBM's fault, and that's HP's fault. What's internal Sara Lee's fault? But I realized pretty quick that I was probably working myself out of a job. You don't need a head of IT recruiting if all of IT is outsourced. But during that time, I had made friends with a lot of people at corporate, just because again, I'm the sales guy that doesn't shut up, and you put a sales guy on a corporate HR team, and anytime they were like, hey, we need somebody from talent acquisition to get on stage and talk to 35,000 people. I'm just the only idiot that was like, hell yeah, I'll do that. I love the stage. And so I ended up, getting an opportunity I had to move up to Chicago and get an opportunity to lead recruiting for the Fresh Bakery. And so we did that. And honestly, Tim, for some years there, all the people that I was working with had been with Sara Lee for decades, And so in my mind, I was like, well, this is who I am. This is what I do. I'll probably just retire from Sara Lee, but then Sara Lee went out of business. A lot of people don't know that still, but yeah. So we went out of business back in 2012. To this day, if you go and pick out a loaf of Sara Lee bread and turn it over, you'll see in the fine prints distributed by the Bimbo Baking Company, out of Mexico. So, and even that, there was sadly, I've had a great relationship with our CEO, Brenda, and sadly she had a stroke. Maybe that was 2011. I can't remember, but she had to step down, from her duties. And a new CEO came over from Amsterdam. Good enough guy, but as soon as he got there, he just immediately started carving out all the company's shared services and siphoning them to specific products. You know what I mean? Everybody has their own research and development department. Everybody has their own, and it was like, and of course, that guy didn't know that even though I was a recruiter, I have a finance degree. So I'm like looking at this like, the only reason you would do this is to divest all these brands and to break the company up, and of course, like, no, we're all one Sara Lee, one big happy family, but sure enough, within 6 months or so, you started seeing, there goes Jimmy Dean's, there goes Hillshire Farms, there goes, and then there went Scott. I got sold like a free agent in one of those transactions to that Mexican baking company, Bimbo Bakeries. And so went down there, good group down there. The Ceviche family, I think, is still managing that. Daniel Ceviche was the CEO. And I remember him, being like, hey, Scott, we've 110,000 global employees, and we've never had a centralized recruiting team. He's like, how about we'll just, we can move you down to Mexico City, build the whole thing out. This would be great. And I'm like, Daniel, look, my wife and I are pregnant, you know, he's 12 now, little guy, he's 12. And I was like, plus, I don't speak a lick of Spanish. I mean, all those years in the Marine Corps, being out there like Camp Pendleton and trying to get burritos on the beach, I know how to say, where are the bathrooms and more chicken, please. That's like the extent. I can ask for more chicken and where are the bathrooms? That's like the essentials. That's right. And so we resigned, and honestly, that's or I say we, my wife and I resigned, and then we wanted to move back to Cincinnati because grandparents are here, and so we came back here, and ultimately that's what pushed me into entrepreneurship. And I always kind of wanted to be in entrepreneurship. I just never really exactly knew what the path would be. And so we started Veteran Talent, actually spun off from a veteran career fair company called Recruitment, which was situated in Cincinnati back in the day. And that's been, man, 11 years ago now. So, which is crazy. I've been saying that to candidates lately. It's like, hey, we're a boutique, recruiting firm focused on placing military veterans with private companies across the U.S. Been in business going on 11 years. And I was like, every time I say that now, it just makes me feel old, so.
Well, you haven't aged a day, particularly your background must have been stressful. So,
Somebody told me the other day, they're like, oh, we got to update this. You've got this great community on LinkedIn, but you need to engage it more. We need to update your profile picture. And I'm like, whoa, what do you mean? I haven't aged a day. That picture's just fine. So yeah, it happens to us all, right?
It does. And I'd love to hear more about the military, because maybe it's just because I'm in Australia, but it's not as big of a thing here. Obviously, the size of our military relative to the United States is minuscule. As a result, then we don't really have the knowledge around what it's like to be in the military. I think it would be pretty rare that anyone would know anyone who's had that background, or at least know that in detail. So I'd love to hear more about the kind of skills that you learned there and how you've taken them forward in the rest of your career.
So, it's a great question. I mean, honestly, I think the skills that I learned there that I took forward in my career would really be mostly centered around the aspect of leadership and confidence, And so, and not that I was not confident prior to joining the military. I certainly was. I'm just that sales guy. I'm always been, pushing forward. But I published an article years ago, and I think it's still out there on LinkedIn, but you might enjoy it. But it's basically leadership development, Marine Corps style, and what that means is like in the Marine Corps, you find that you put folks into the most chaotic situations imaginable. As leaders, this is what you do. You take your soldiers, you take your Marines, and you put them in the most chaotic situation imaginable, and then you step back and observe and watch. And it's going to be, it's going to be insane, and it's going to be painful, and there's going to be suffering. But at the end of the day, somebody within that group in the midst of chaos is going to step forward and try to take charge and try to do something positive and try to elicit some improvement to the situation that they find themselves in. They may fail miserably, but it doesn't matter. They stepped up and tried. And as a result, and as serving as a point of emulation for the others around them, other people are going to observe what that person did. And then the next time they're in a situation of chaos, they're going to be more confident to step up, and they themselves have a voice and try to move the needle forward. And so I always try to say, like, try to incorporate that methodology or that philosophy into corporate, leadership development. However, I totally understand that in today's litigious society, you know what I mean? You can't intentionally put people in too much chaos, because you'll just get sued, where it's a little bit different in the Marine Corps. You can literally, put people in the most insane situations possible, and then just kind of sit back and see what unfolds. And so I think being in those situations time over time again, and becoming comfortable, literally becoming comfortable with chaos, is what a lot of people from the military bring to the civilian workforce. They're not going to be intimidated by chaos. And no matter how much you plan as a leader, no matter how talented you are, you're not going to be able to completely avoid aspects of chaos within your plant, within your sales team, within your HR, whatever it is you do. You're not going to be within your startup. Certainly within your startup, there's going to be chaos, And so having people that aren't intimidated by that, number one, and having people, number two, that have the ability and confidence to stand up and try to address that chaos with confidence is very valuable.
Okay, so it's dealing with the chaos by confronting it, not crumbling under the pressure, not kind of getting into a freeze mode, but saying, well, I don't know if this is going to work, but we're going to proactively try to solve the problem this way. At least give it a shot rather than doing nothing, which is probably, in a lot of cases, the worst thing you could do.
Oh, 100%. Doing nothing is always more destructive than doing something wrong, if that makes sense. Doing nothing is the most wrong thing you can do, I guess. But, if you took some action, it's always going to be at least markedly more productive than have done nothing at all,
It's interesting. Actually, I do know a couple of people who've worked in the military here. One of the first jobs I ever had, I worked with someone who'd had a pretty substantial military career. And I remember we were setting up a boardroom before a presentation between our company and a major bank here. And so it's a bit of pressure. And I remember driving to this meeting, actually, my friend, the guy from the military, was doing about 40 Ks over the speed limit, which is driving like a maniac by city standards anyway, is really keen to get there on time. Maybe we were running a little bit late. But remember, as we were setting up the boardroom, this is my first year of work, by the way. I did a finance degree like yourself. Maybe I was overly analytical in some ways. And I remember he said something to me which stuck. He said, don't think, Timmy, do. And I wonder if that's something he picked up in the military, that kind of mentality of kind of being action oriented and not overthinking things and just kind of getting on with it.
Right. And even when you take action without a tremendous amount of, planning or thinking ahead of time, there's a lot of thought that's going into that, even if it's subconscious, so even if it's informed by things that you've seen and learned previously, that action has thought behind it, whether you're actively thinking about it or not. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying to never plan. That's not what I'm saying. However, don't fold under the chaos. Just take action, do something, just make an effort. And I think you'll find that most people will recognize the chaos that you were confronted with and will respect the effort that you put forth.
Is there something to be said for that skill also directly translating into sales skills, in the sense that anytime you have a conversation with someone, it could go in any direction. They could ask you anything about your company, anything about your product, anything about you. They could come up and be aggressive or defensive or what have you. And just being able to deal with the infinitely many paths is itself also almost like a component of sales skills. Is that a fair summary?
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely true. And I've made recommendations to a ton of hiring managers over the years that are looking for salespeople to not rule out military folks, to not, especially military recruiters, because actually military recruiters go through professional sales training, some of the most robust professional sales training. So, if you're looking to fill a sales position, especially if it's like an entry level sales position, doesn't need industry specific experience or things like that. You would basically really want to think about or look at folks with a military recruiting background. So they're going to be aggressive and confident and competent, especially in their sales approach. I was never a military recruiter, so I never went through that training, but I'm very familiar with it. And I've placed a lot of folks into sales roles from that specific MOS, military occupational specialty.
Is there anything to be said for maybe deliberately adding a bit of chaos to the interview itself, like the hiring process, and kind of borrowing some of those learnings you had from the military and just kind of seeing how the candidate deals with it?
Could be. Maybe late in the interview process, if in my opinion, once you've developed some trust and some confidence, you maybe not want to do that, when you're still kind of dealing with first impressions. You know what I'm saying? In my opinion, but if it's later in the interview process, depending on how the interview process is structured, what kind of assessment tools you're utilizing or things like that. But yeah, I think that could be helpful to think about that and try to incorporate it and see what happens.
Yeah, I guess it probably depends on the role a bit, doesn't it? Like I remember when I was first starting out trying to get into investment banking, and they used to use at this point the stress interview technique where they'd just be deliberately obnoxious and aggressive. Uh, I remember interviewing one person from, I think it was Bank of America Merrill Lynch. And I come into the interview room, she's sitting down, like doesn't even look at me, doesn't shake my hand, sort of just to sit down, starts peppering me with questions, no smile. And I remember her asking me something like, "Oh, what's the most impressive thing you've done recently?" And I told her about the fact I was doing this full-time job, full-time degree, just not that easy, I don't think. It's like 90 hours a week or something. Just like, that doesn't impress me at all. So obviously deliberately trying to rattle me in some sense, I guess, because in their mind, part of the role of an investment banker would be to maybe deal with the CEO of a company. This is like a $5 billion deal. You got to think on your feet and not crumble and those kinds of things. So maybe for that kind of role, it's fair enough. But maybe a lot of other roles, that's just not a realistic requirement. Like as a software engineer, for example, probably you don't often have to deal with that level of intense pressure. So maybe in those cases, it's not as important.
Agreed. Yeah, but I mean, if you want to, kind of have some sort of insight into who the person is that you're dealing with, even if it is, like an engineer, but you want to think, hey, is this a potential future engineering manager? You know what I mean? And let's be honest, a lot of folks in the engineering field are not well suited for people leadership or for sales. And that's not a hit on any of those engineers at all. It's just, personality structures and the way Tim, I've interviewed I've countless engineers, especially, considering on the IT side. And fortunately for them, I'm the dude that never shuts up, and I can always work hard to force down their barriers and their walls and get them comfortable in talking to me. But it's hard, it's tough, especially for people in that mindset. And which is, honestly, the fact that their personalities are organized that way is probably part of the reason that they pursue fields like engineering or like accounting, or I just want to sit down and deal with the books. You know what I mean? And fair enough. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But it might be nice to know, who might be well suited as a candidate to maybe step into a people leadership engineering role. Although, if you hire them into the role itself, you're going to, over the course of time, you're going to find out, you know what I mean, who's structured for those kind of positions and who's not. So anyway, yeah, but there could be something there though.
You'd mentioned at the top of the call that, everyone's an interesting character if you get to know them, and you've described yourself certainly as a people person. I'd love to just kind of unlock your mindset for a second. So like if you were to meet a complete stranger, what are you thinking about? How are you approaching that conversation? How do you get to know them? Yeah, I'd love to just hear your general thought process and compare it to the way I would think about it, for example.
Well, first of all, I don't know that I think a lot about it, which is probably what makes me good at it. You know what I mean? So, yeah, if I meet you, I mean, Tim, you and I could meet in line at Chipotle. They have Chipotle in Australia, right?
Maybe just now, maybe a few stores here and there. Yeah, but I know about it. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. I love Chipotle. So, it's see, the Marine Corps did that to me. Those chicken burritos on the beach. It just stuck with me. Chicken burritos. No, but we could run into each other literally in line at Chipotle, and within minutes I could be talking to you like we've known each other for years. And I understand that's just something that's more systemic to me. But I don't think a lot about it. I think the biggest thing, if I have to, you force me to kind of think about it. I'm open-minded, I'm interested. And I think people can sense that I'm genuinely interested in them and what they're doing and what their thoughts are about whatever it is we happen to be talking about in line at Chipotle or, wherever. And, my wife brings this up all the time that she's not as outgoing, you know what I mean? Especially with strangers and things like that. And, so she's just like, you've never met a stranger. You talk to everybody, but yeah, but honestly, I don't put a lot of thought into it. I'm just, I guess I just, I just assume that everyone I meet is a friend of mine. And I think that assumption wears off on them. You know what I mean? And then when you make that assumption, then they're like, "Oh yeah, obviously I'm your friend," and we just start talking. Um, so that's that. I give people the benefit of the doubt, understanding though, and look, this is something I've learned over the years. I've been around a while now. Just turned 50, feeling but still feel great. But even though I do give people the benefit of the doubt, I'm an overly trusting individual. I certainly am, and I think you need to be, especially in sales. But also, I've been stabbed in the back enough to know, and trust me, I've been stabbed in the back a lot. But I've been stabbed in the back enough to know that when it happens, I can survive it. And so that way, I'm not worried about, I meet this stranger here, or I meet, develop this relationship there. I'm not worried about them stabbing me in the back, because I know some small percentage of people are going to, and it's happened enough now that I'm just like, yeah, well, I'll just pull out the knife and, you know, keep on moving.
So the backstabbing doesn't then make you change your behavior for the future, because you just write it off and say, well, it's going to happen sometimes, but that's not going to make me cynical or jaded or what have you.
But I learned through experience that I survive it. I can overcome it. And I think sometimes, look, sometimes some people may not be able to, and sometimes maybe something's happened to them that's much more serious than things that have happened to me, and they can't overcome that. So I'm not judging anybody that can't overcome those instances. But it's just, it's happened enough where I'm just like, that's cool. I'll just keep moving. I'll even forgive that person too. I'm willing to still talk to that person, within limits, you know what I mean? But, um, you know, won't necessarily invite them over to hang out with the family or anything, but
And it's interesting mindset also, given your military background. I mean, anyone who's worked in the military is dealing with bad actors at some level or another. And so to not have come out of that with a very almost defensive mindset of everyone's out to get me, the whole world is evil, we need to lock down the situation, you've come out with the opposite.
The opposite, for sure. 100%. Yep. No doubt about that. And that's, my 8 years in the Marine Corps, like I told you, was crypto. So that's all intel. And then when I went back in the military again, a second time, because that wasn't enough abuse, I didn't think. But this time as a commissioned officer. And so I spent 5 years as a commissioned officer, and I branched intel because of my previous time as crypto. So I figured intel would make the most sense. So I've got 13 total years in military intelligence. So 13 years with a top secret military clearance. And my little joke I like to tell is like, and I don't even know if aliens are real. It's kind of nonsense, I should know, but no, but what, all that did really for me is I got an in-depth understanding of the ways in which, the military procures, collects, disseminates, evaluates, and acts upon information. And so did it create something defensive in me that everybody's out to get me? Actually, what it really did is create a philosophical anarchist. And I have no qualms in stating that. That's precisely what I am. And so,
what is a philosophical anarchist?
Well, not to, and you probably don't want to go down that, too deeply, but yeah, I don't see I don't interpret the same need for structured government that most people see. Although I do understand and respect people's interpreted need of government. And so I understand that it's there, because people believe that it needs to be there. But all I can do, like, for instance, if the government collapsed tomorrow and there was no more structure, there were no more laws, I'm not going to change the way I live my life in any way, shape, or form, period. And so I think the things that keep us well behaved aren't the laws. It's the things that we all need to live with each other symbiotically, and we all need to survive, and we all need to advance, and we all have things to accomplish. And the way we get those things accomplished is by collaborating with one another. Not now. You'd be like, oh, Scott, there's some people that steal and hurt people and kill. Yes, there are. But you see that they're doing those things even with all those laws. And so I don't think the absence of government, I think there would be the same amount of psychopaths within any given population. There'd still be the same amount, and so, but anyway, I know I can sit here and talk to you about, government, politics, and anarchism for hours, but you probably don't want to, focus on that specific.
I kind of do, but yeah, maybe the listeners might not have the same interest as myself.
So yeah, that's where I am. I'm not a big fan of Democrats or Republicans. So, you know.
Okay, good. Well, you're unlike a lot of people where you're sort of polar end of one side of the spectrum. You're on not on the spectrum at all. Maybe that's the best way.
No, I'm not. I'm not. Yeah, I grew up, in a Reagan conservative household. You know what I mean? So, and when I was a young man, I was like, yeah, I'm, you know, socially liberal and fiscally conservative. But then as I marched through life, and learned a lot more, it's like, oh, this is all kind of nonsense. So, especially if you start seeing the whys behind why government exists, how it grows, how it metastasizes, how it goes about addressing problems, you start to see rather quickly that it's way more destructive than it is productive. So that's all I'll say.
I can't disagree with you there, Scott.
I'm a free market guy. Just let us, you let us have our startups. Let us address the economy. You know what I mean? Let us serve the needs and provide value to people, and that's it.
I agree fully. What what about back to hiring then? So I'd love to know, is there anything that any kind of belief about hiring that you have that is out of the norm, that might be considered a little bit strange or controversial, but something you've kind of learnt through time to rely on?
Well, I mean, I don't think this is strange or controversial in any way, shape, or form, but it has kind of that old, construct of what's old is new again, you know? And so, for instance, now with all of IT and all of technology, there's all these tools out there, and everybody's like, oh, you got to have this tool and you got to have that tool and it can do this. But at the end of the day, you can go out and have like all these platforms and post a job and get, 600 applicants to the job in, 45 minutes. I'm exaggerating, but not by that much, So, and that's all well and good. But what I found out that the less time I spend on these platforms from an aggregation of candidates standpoint, the less time I spend out there posting jobs, collecting candidates who apply, and the more time I spend getting to know the people who are making the hiring decisions, getting to know the hiring managers, understanding what it is outside of the job description that's really going to make a candidate successful there, outside somebody's resume that's really going to make somebody come in and really hit the ground running and make an impact in that industry, in that company, in that role, et cetera. The more time I spend doing that, and the more time I go out and actually finger point at people that I see that are like, hey, this is exactly who this plant manager described to me. This is exactly who this VP said that they need. And I reach out and try to start a conversation with those people individually. Hey, Tim, came across your profile today, working with an awesome client who's got a need that might be very interesting in your background. Do me a favor, connect with me here on LinkedIn or wherever it is I'm finding them. And let's chat about it. And then, of course, like any sales funnel, you got to put enough of those finger points on the top to get a couple of drips out the bottom. But what drips out the bottom are people who are engaged, interested in making a move. And, oh, by the way, on paper, at least, I mean, absolute A+ players for what I know that the hiring manager seeks. And you can't do that through any technological tool. You can't. It just comes down to that sales, is spending the time building that relationship and understanding what it is that company's looking for. And so that's what I say. It's kind of like what's old is new again, because back in the day, before IT, revolutionized all these industries, what I just described was the only way, to go about things. And so, that's what I do. And that's how I get a lot of our successful hires, is taking the time to really understand the need and going out and self-identifying. And a lot of clients of mine, they're pleasantly surprised when I make that comment in a sales call. I'll be like, Tim, look, I'm not going to post your job. And normally you just see the expressions that I get from people like, what? I'm like, you post your job, Tim, you post it. I'm not going to go out and compete with you on the exact same platforms. You know what I mean? If a job seeker happens to see my posting 3 minutes before they see your posting, then I get $20,000 for making that placement. You know what I mean? It's like, how does that make any sense? I'm not going to post your job. You post your job. You spend some time with me. Tell me what it is I need to look for. I'm going to go out and find the people who aren't applying to the jobs and get the person you really need and want. And so that's where I have success.
I'm going to put that into some words or framework that I would think about in hiring and see what you think. So I kind of feel like hiring's a matching problem where you need to collect some data about the candidates on one side and the job and the company on the other side. And it kind of sounds like you're saying, well, the data you have from a resume, from a LinkedIn profile is pretty limited. The data you have from a job description is pretty limited. And it's only by having those in-depth conversations that you kind of peel away the onion to really get to the root of like what each party wants. And then you can match them. Without that, you kind of just stabbing in the dark a little bit.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yep. That's absolutely true.
And so it must be, so maybe here's one way to ask it. What percentage of what you actually need to know about a job and a company is on the job description? Like how much extra information do you have to gather through those conversations with the hiring manager, through other interviewers?
Well, so a lot of it, man, what percentage? I don't know. Let's just say totally made up number, 50%. I don't know. Cause at least the job, you know what I mean? At least the job description is going to be like, hey, this is the general kind of degree that we need and the general kind of skill set, quality job or whatever it is. So at least it identifies all of that. And that's great. But the kind of things that the sort of information that you're trying to get are things that you'll never find on a job description. You can't even put it in there. Like for instance, I don't know why this came to mind. There was a VP of manufacturing at Sara Lee. He actually passed not too long ago, sadly. Really good guy. But he was, before coming to Sara Lee, he was an operations director or maybe a junior VP with Anheuser-Busch. And he used to joke with me all the time. We'd be at these conventions together and be like, Scott, beer and bread are exactly the same. You just add more water, into beer. It's like, but it's the same thing, but he used to go on about the Anheuser-Busch systems, their training systems, and how well structured they were for developing talent. And he had a deep respect for people that had gone through that Anheuser-Busch process, And so I knew then as a recruiter that if I could find literally anybody who'd ever worked for Anheuser-Busch, and presented it to him, hired. So it's those sort of things, those sort of little things that you can find within people, people I like to call them preferences. You know what I mean? And people might like to say, oh, it's bias, And look, another word for bias is preference, And look, there are negative things that you can have bias about, especially when it comes to like race or ethnicity or, or gender, you shouldn't do that. But generally speaking, everybody has a long list of preferences that are well developed for many different reasons. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so to get in and understand what that hiring manager's experience has been, what has informed those preferences, why they exist, and then go out and look for somebody who's aligned with those specific things that make that hiring manager tick, if that makes sense. So, and you're not going to find that on a job description. Sara Lee's not going to post a job description for a production manager like Sara Lee, production manager, qualifications or requirements, 5 years at Anheuser-Busch. You know what I mean? You won't find stuff like that on a job description. So,
and I can think back to myself where I've kind of ignored this at our own cost, which was, I can remember with our own little agency, working with a hiring manager who, for whatever reason, really didn't want to hire any analysts who'd worked in the big four accounting companies. She had just, again, probably a well-reasoned out philosophy of why she thought they weren't going to be a good fit into that role. But I presented a candidate who fit that profile anyway. I'm like, no, trust me, you have to speak to them. They've done this skills test, they've done the interview, they're really good. But, when someone's already made their mind up, and it's very hard to convert a no to a yes. I think you can convert a maybe to a yes, but a no to a yes is pretty much impossible. And I remember when we ended up presenting this candidate, they kind of put them into a slightly different track and say, oh, look, go and speak to the HR manager instead. I remember speaking to the candidate and they'd started the interview with like, well, this is probably a waste of time, but we'll do it anyway kind of vibe. So he never really had an honest chance. Like he was already rejected before he started the call. So I sent my boy over the top to be mowed down by the machine guns is one way of putting it. And I regret that. And so I know now.
But you did that. You did that with the belief, the legitimate belief that if you would just talk to him, you have a shot. But now you sort of understand through experience. It's like, yeah, it's
we were kind of optimizing for objectivity and saying, well, we have the data to kind of prove in a way that this is the right candidate. But if they've already made their mind up, then you can't really do anything about that. But yeah, that becomes a slightly gray area, doesn't it? Because, it's maybe innocuous if the hiring manager says nobody from the big four. Okay, fine. But what happens if they say no one from your XYZ background? Then you're in a bit of a moral quandary in a sense.
you are. But also, look, when it comes to I do. And also when it comes to the aspect of, hey, I'm a third party vendor to all these companies. I don't have the platform by which I can go in and change anything. And also, I don't think that these mindsets, even if it is a moral quandary with a specific role and a specific hiring manager, I don't think that that's representative of that whole company. You know what I mean? It's just representative of that individual, period. And so, if it's too pervasive from a moral standpoint, I could just simply choose to not support the role, and I'm just like, I know this person, I know they're not gonna, I'm thinking back to way back in the day with tech systems, and I don't know how true this was. And I was just a young guy sitting in an open pit, you know what I mean, making phone calls, but I remember one of my buddies looking at me. He'd been there for several years, so I was kind of leaning on him, and he's just like, this client showed up with a role up on the board on the wall, and he's just like, oh yeah, make sure don't send them black people. I remember that, just sitting there. I'm like, oh really? And he's like, oh yeah, don't even do it. And so then, but again, I don't know how true it was. This is just something I experienced and I heard, so who knows? And it wasn't one of my direct clients anyway, so it wasn't something I had to spend any time on. But now, as a business owner, if I get that sense, or if I get something like that, that makes me uncomfortable, I can just walk away and not support that company. And then that company, by exhibiting behaviors that are maybe morally questionable, they are going to self-limit themselves to the top talent within any given market. And by limiting themselves to the top talent available within a market, they're going to limit their ability to compete in the market, and they're going to ultimately, over time, self-destruct, and that's that. So, I don't worry too much about it. Cause again, I don't have a platform by which I can cause like you said, you're not going to change people's minds, especially if you try to go in there forcefully and be like, you're a bad person for feeling this way.
Yes. That's not gonna.
Well, exactly. So I just, it's like, okay, I'm not going to be able to, nothing I can do here. And so I move on and support other places where I can provide value, and people are open-minded to that. So,
and I wonder if, so these preferences, preferences in that case, a bias, but label it however we like, you unpack these in those calls, and I guess you're kind of looking out for, I'm sure if you'd spoken to the hiring manager, you might not have expressed it in those explicit terms. You might have said something was a little bit more around the bidding around the bush, and it's kind of for you to decode in a sense.
One of the biggest questions I ask right from the start, when I'm getting to know somebody or getting to know a role for the first time, even if it's somebody that I already have a long history of supporting and working with, but I'm just like, hey, Tim, thanks for letting me work on this. Tell me, who's been extremely successful in this role in the past, and what kind of background did they have? And trust me, they'll just start firing things off, oh, there was so-and-so, and he did this, he came from this, background, came from this industry, and this is why that was a big deal. I'm like, cool. And then, what have you seen any sort of, people from certain backgrounds that failed in this role? And then again, they'll know examples like, oh yeah, this didn't work out. And look, Tim, you and I both know that again, that's more about those individuals for specific reasons. However, you are understanding though their mindset. And if you send candidates, with a background that looks like this from this kind of industry, and they're going to be like, oh, this is just like, whoever that just rocked this role that's been promoted 5 times. And so, you're going to get a hire. And at the end of the day, look, I run a recruiting company. I need to get hires and generate revenue. You know what I mean? So I want those little hints as to who's gonna get preferential treatment, and 99% of the time it comes down to things that wouldn't upset people. It comes down to, types of experience and skill set and what they're strong at and what kind of industry, where they've done well. So it really never comes down to that one conversation I shared with you from way back in my tech systems days. That was like about the only time anybody's even brought up race to me in my 21 years in recruiting,
I had a curious one myself about a year ago where we'd gotten a candidate to the final round of a role for a business in Europe. And I was speaking to the manager, getting some feedback on the last three candidates who got into the final stage. And in reference to one of the candidates, making comments about the kind of the pros and cons. And she said something that was quite curious. She said, she was great, but I didn't get the sense that she was anti-Putin. The candidate was from Russia. Okay. so, so I'm like, oh, okay. And I didn't really know how to deal with that because I'm like, well, fine, but like, what the hell's that got to do with anything to do with an analyst job? Like, why would that even matter one way or another? And why is it up to her to, like, I doubt part of her interview process was grilling her on her politics, which is presumably illegal in that country, although I'm not sure. And so she was probably guessing it anyway, because this candidate hadn't gone out of the way to wear like a Ukraine shirt or something. I don't know what she's expecting. And that's the kind of thing that I would never have thought to kind of scan for that in the initial, job calls, because that's a bit out of the ordinary.
That is, and I would have been uncomfortable navigating that conversation myself, and just trying to figure it out, especially when she would learn my politics, if she ever would, I'm sure that would leave her very aghast, So, but yeah, it's Matt, that's crazy. So.
Yeah, but those are fewer and far between. So they're the outliers that stick out. Most, as we say, most conversations are a bit more normal and reasonable than that.
Oh, absolutely. So, and even that one instance I did have, that was racially oriented. Again, who knows if that was even true or how true that was about that. You know what I mean? That's just a dude in the open pit said this about that client. Who knows, And obviously I would never share that client's name, because who knows? And again, it's like I said, it's not about that client. Even if that is true, it was about an individual who happened to work for that client, and so, so that's that. But yeah, I never really come across that, and certainly, even if those sorts of biases do exist, 99.9% of hiring managers aren't going to verbalize that on a call with exactly. They're not going to talk about it, even if those biases do exist. So,
yes. Scott, tell us about Climb. What's Climb all about?
Climb needs to get climbing, man. So honestly, I got to look, Climb is a startup that I came up with at Sara Lee. I came up with this at Sara Lee. So this is an old idea. Funny though, even though it's an old idea, it still would be industry shaping, in the job board space, the recruitment, advertising, employer branding space. It would be game changing and will be. But we've just been, so far, myself and a couple of partners have been completely self-funded. And then over the last, 18 to 24 months, I'd say, we've all become a little distracted, investing in other companies, building this. Veteran talent took a sharp nosedive, post-COVID, with respect to, making placements, and still got lots of clients, but the majority of them they just weren't hiring, or at least not from us. But in reality, they really weren't hiring, period, from anybody, So I know everybody likes to say that, like, oh, the U.S. economy was wonderful, during the post-COVID recovery, but it's like, no, it's not, not at all. But anyway, so that's kind of kept us distracted. Starting to have some conversations again about getting some more traction behind that. We put a lot of effort into back-end development, and so we've got a pretty solid back-end developed. And when I say that, I mean data acquisition. So we've got tools and scrapers out there to go out and get the data that we want in the way that we want it. And then now I've got the entire front end, the entire UI UX mapped out on, I can't remember the tool, Lucid, maybe. I think that's the tool. Yeah. And so the whole thing is designed and mapped out, but now I just need to find somebody that knows how to code. I'm told that we should code it in React. I don't know. Right. I'm the non-technical founder guy. I'm just like, sure, if that's what you say. I mean, one language is just, I don't know. The back end is developed in Python, the scraper and the data acquisition tool. So that's kind of where we're at. And the way I see this is, it is most people, the market's going to interpret the tool once we get it to a point of an MVP and a launch. The market's going to interpret the tool as a job board. But in reality, it's so much more than that. It does so much more than that. There's a lot of AI aspects to it. And those AI developments for the tool aren't even new with the advent of AI. I mean, these are, again, ideas and thoughts I had, I don't know, 20, 12, 13 years ago, Now, granted, if I had tried to stand this up through investment 12 or 13 years ago, there wasn't the same sort of technology that's available today to support my idea if I tried to do it 12 or 13 years ago. So there's that. So, and we have a lot of branding work done too. We've even got the little characters developed, you know what I mean? The character that will be partnering with the companies, and then the little character, the little AI character that'll be partnering with the job seekers. His name is Everest. He's a little friendly little
Mountain climber.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, so that's where we're at with that. We need to get that front end developed and stood up. Again, it's all designed and mapped out. Really just need to invest in the right resource to come in and help stand that thing up, and at least get that to a point where it's in that MVP status, where it's something that a tool that people can look at, play with, and interact with. And I think that'll just snowball from there. So, because it's going to bring a lot of value to the market. I hate saying this, but for free, So, and that's a lot of free value that a lot of other companies used to deliver to the market that is now deeply over monetized, because these companies have metastasized and grown, and they no longer do that. So, and under my watch, at least, this tool will never over monetize in that way. Now there could be some unforeseen future date where I sell, and then God knows what happens with the company after that. But we'll see. But that's where we're at with Climb. Yeah, I wish I had more I could share with you. As far as sending you to this site or playing with you. Or if you go to climb.ai right now, it's just going to take you to Veteran Talent's god awful website. And please don't go there. My website sucks. I'm just letting you guys know. So I say that, and I'm fully aware. But again, my entire company has been built on my relationships. I've never really relied on my website, for business development. I don't rely on it for candidate acquisition. I don't rely on anything for. So if anybody does happen to see it, please understand that is a drag and drop website that I built with Weebly like 11 years ago, and you'll understand right away. You'll be like, yeah, this sucks. So I know I need to invest some money into Veteran Talent's website, but really, my focus, I would love for my focus and dollars to go toward Climb as well, and get that moving. So,
well, yeah, it'd be fascinating to see where you guys end up with Climb, and that's Climb with a K, isn't it?
Climb with a K. Yep.
Excellent. And yeah, Scott, we've chatted about such a wide range of things today. We've gone right around the world. I do think you're a fascinating chap, and I'm sure we could do this again sometime.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been such an easy and interesting conversation.
I appreciate that. I love it. Thanks, Tim.